idea of purpose is an interesting one. That may be a purpose we discover and go, hey, I want to do this. If your tank empty, you're going to lead from an empty tank. You're going to have less to give. You're going to have less to serve. Character matters. You need to have a center. You need to have a compass.
All right. So if you don't mind, could you start with an introduction?
Sure. My name is Doug Lindsay. Grew up in the great Midwest in Kansas on a farm. I think that helped frame kind of how I view things and where I come from. Went into the military through the Air Force Academy, spent about 22 years doing that, behavioral science, psychology, leadership, development training in that aspect. Really enjoyed that. And then after that, kind of got my PhD, kind of really focused that a little bit more to where now I do a lot of consulting, leader development training, and education around character and leader development. How do we do that? How do we think about it? And how do we do that effectively?
Fantastic. And I have so many questions there, but I'm going to start just with you. How did you find your way to the Air Force?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I grew up in a very rural area, a very grounded area of, didn't have a lot growing up. So kind of growing up with an appreciation for what you have. Not always a lot of opportunity to get any more. So you just really kind of learn to appreciate where you were, where you grew up. My mom and dad were real foundational in that aspect. I'm actually adopted. I have an identical twin brother, and we were both adopted by my parents. They couldn't have kids. And so just, I don't know, I think maybe just organically just had an appreciation for life and where that was. And I grew up in a military town, Leavenworth, Kansas. There's an Army post there. My dad worked 43 years on post as a civilian. My mom worked about 25 years as a civilian on there. And I think I just grew up appreciating the military service, having a purpose for your life, and just that idea of, I think, service. And so going up in high school, I had some success grade-wise. And when it came time to think about college, there wasn't a lot of money in the tank to send my brother and I to college, especially at the same time. And so we were fortunate and blessed to apply to the academy and get accepted. And so we both went in there and in 1988, graduated in 92, and then thought I'd serve for a few years, find my way, and then just really enjoyed every day. I ended up serving 22 years, 7 months, and 4 days, and enjoyed just about every single one of them.
That's incredible. 22 years, 7 months, 4 days.
Yeah. The reason I know that, it seems like an arbitrary thing.
No, I like it. I like that. Yeah.
They calculate that for you when you're done. I never really tracked it as I was going along.
You weren't in an office like this making hash marks on the wall, counting.
No. Now, when I was deployed, I probably did that a little bit more, counting the days when I was in Afghanistan. Sure. But beyond that, no, it just kind of happened. I thought, I go to the academy, I graduate, I got a 5-year commitment. That came and went, still enjoyed it, got to 10 years, was still enjoying it, kind of that halfway point, got to 15 and go, I'm close. And then I hit the 20-year mark. And I'm like, well, I guess I could walk away now, but I just was having fun. I was teaching at the Air Force Academy, had gotten my education, really was enjoying that aspect of it. And then had an opportunity after that and said, okay, probably about time to make a shift. And so I did that.
And what did you like so much about it?
I loved having a purpose, being part of something, feeling like I was contributing to something that mattered. And again, philosophically, we can talk whether you agree with the military and all of that and the focus, but it just always felt like it filled that purpose in my life of being able to serve, give back, do something, contributing to something larger than myself. And that was important to me. I don't know why. There was a value there that really resonated with me and still does.
Well, first, Doug, I appreciate you talking about your childhood. We've looked a lot into the world of psychology and psychotherapy, and we're very open to all of that work, interested in learning more. But the idea that everything stems from childhood is at least an interesting place to start.
Yeah.
And I love your explanation. There's something about the Midwest in general that I think that just has sort of at least is what I've experienced. Yes, a work ethic, but also almost like an appreciation for the opportunity to do the work. And that extends to the things that you mentioned. I heard gratitude and appreciation. I heard service, and I heard purpose. How old were you and your brother when you were adopted?
We were like 3 months old. So very, very young. It was
brand,
but yeah, really, my mom and dad couldn't have kids. And so they knew that my mom had always said, hey, she's a person of faith, and goes, I know God's got my kids out there. And actually adopted, I have identical twin sisters also.
Oh, wow.
So they adopted them in 1966. And my mom said, I'm not done. I've got more kids out there that need to be part of this family. And so then my brother and I were available for adoption, and then they adopted us. And so we kind of grew up in this environment, and it was just a working environment. We were always working. And you mentioned that whole idea of work ethic, but it was more than that. It was really more of an identity. It's like not just an appreciation that there was work, but just a desire to want to do good work and a good day's work for your effort, and to lay down at night and feel good about what was accomplished in that day. And so it is the work ethic. It was the gratitude, and there wasn't much, but I mean, we didn't know there wasn't much. We didn't have that to compare to. So that idea of just being thankful for what was there, and it was good,
Dude, I'm getting choked up over here. First of all, that your mom sounds like an incredible human being.
Absolutely. She was my dad as well. My dad was the one that kind of put his head down, but my mom was really the one that kind of herded us, shepherded us, really brought that faith piece into our lives, and that appreciation for something greater than ourselves, and something bigger forces at play, and how we could contribute and link and be appreciative of that. So yeah, she was an amazing woman.
Sounds amazing. And I'm trying to think, where do we take this conversation next? Because I have so many questions that stem just from that. That makes me, for the listeners, for the people who might not associate with the specific religion, at least the humility to sort of believe that there's something bigger that brings both purpose and humility, which is something that I really appreciate. I want to ask this question. I've never asked this of anyone in my life. I've never had the opportunity to, but do you remember when you found out, if you were 3 months when you were adopted, do you remember when you found out that you were? It was known throughout, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my wife asked me that, when we were first dating, it's like, oh, you're adopted I never didn't know. It was never a big deal. My mom always felt and was very open about it. She goes, look, I couldn't have kids myself, but I knew God had my kids out there, and it was just a matter of finding you. And so, yeah, you came to the family a little bit differently than normal, but you came the right way that you were supposed to for this family and there. So it was never a big deal. It was never an odd thing. Everybody always knew, and it just wasn't a big deal. I kind of thought, well, that's kind of normal. It happens to a lot of people. And,
it does, sure.
Yeah. So it was never a big deal that way. And so we never had a hang up or that moment of, oh man, I'm 18 years old and found out I'm adopted. What?
Right.
It was never a big deal.
And that's interesting. So it sounds like as soon as as you could have conversations, that conversation was around. It was just part of the environment. It was
Yeah. And the family was great about it too, because they didn't make a big deal of it. It wasn't a big deal to them. Like, oh, you're not part of the family. It was just like, oh, okay. You just keep buying other needs. Yeah. You just got here a different way. Okay.
Yeah. I love this idea. We have this mantra where it's like, you don't have to be right, but you do operate thoughtfully, have humility, forgive people, and adapt. We've got this mantra, but what what you just said reminds me of it, because the idea of being right requires us to define it. So it's like, I love that you said, like, we never felt like we weren't part of a family, because you were.
Right.
Obviously, like that, you'd have to create a different, you'd have to name, you have to have a really strict definition of what family meant to even consider a potential alternative. So it sounds like you had an incredible environment. This is my curiosity peaking again. Did you ever, you told that story about people turning 18, finding out they were adopted, and what feels like, and maybe this is just in the movies, but the second part of that story would include going to find one's birth parents. Did that ever occur to you? Is that ever something that was interesting to you and your brother?
It is, and it's interesting you brought that up, because that was always kind of a question there. I wonder, right? But I never, and it's odd. I never felt a need to. Not that I wasn't grateful for my mom, my birth mom, who had me, but everything was full for me in terms of my life and what was there. And I didn't ever want to come across as that hurting my adoptive mom, as, why would I need to seek that person out? And so my mom passed away in 2005. And then afterward, my brother and I were sitting around going, it might be kind of nice to know if there's some sort of family health issues around. And so, we talked about bounce around that idea a little bit and said, is that something we want to do? And actually we ended up finding out that and finding my birth mom and got a chance to meet her and talk to her and find out the story. It was kind of one of those things. 1969, young mom got pregnant, was not married, got sent off by her family to another state to live with her sister. Kind of one of those, go away and you can come back, if you don't have them anymore, kind of thing. And so she went and lived with her sister, had the babies, and then put us up for adoption. There was no other option. That was what the way her belief system was. That was what I wanted to do. Adoption, then went back home, and always kind of wondered, what happened and all of that, and so I think us finding her, getting that clarity around, some of the health issues and all of that, it also was kind of a neat way to give her closure and go, okay, it all kind of worked out the way it needed to, and they got into a good home. So it was really kind of this cathartic, kind of neat opportunity for her to be able to have some closure, because the records are sealed. You don't know. In order to kind of track that down, it's a pretty complicated process for us to do that, and took some time. But overall, it was really good. It didn't fill a void in my life because I didn't have that. But it was nice to be able to just kind of, even tell her thank you for having us, even in that tough situation, because she incurred a lot for that. And then because people have options, right, in what they can do, and obviously appreciative of the option she chose to do that. So it was kind of neat to be able to go and do that.
This is powerful stuff, man. I wasn't expecting to talk about this today, but this is powerful stuff. Yeah, and I love that you share, because a lot of these bedrock concepts are digging down into the foundational pieces of who we are and how that motivates our future behavior and things like that. And it sounds, I like that you're articulating and being very careful to recognize that there wasn't a void that needed to be filled, but there was curiosity. Which is totally fair and healthy to investigate. And man, what a special thing. You were how old when you finally met her?
I would say probably that would have been about maybe 40. I think I was 40.
My guess would be, and I don't want to impose on your story at all, but my guess would be that at least some part of her mind was preoccupied, even if it's in the way back of it, with what happened with that situation. Was it the right call? So for decades. So like you say, to bring that closure, to bring even that little bit of peace to someone's life is incredible.
Yeah, it was kind of, and it was a bit serendipitous. It was kind of a gift back to her in a way, so she would have that. And again, maybe after all those years, she had maybe made peace with it. Things were fine, and all that.
Sure.
But I think it was maybe neat for her, or I like to think it was neat for her to kind of see that,
Of course it was. Yeah.
I made a good choice, or I made the right choice for me, and where that was, and I think back to the earlier point of that whole idea of having purpose and a reason for things happening the way they were. And so again, kind of having a faith background myself, I believe in purpose. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe things happen a certain way for a reason. And so I think maybe that just maybe in the background really helped me think about that when my mom would say, I couldn't have kids, but I knew they were there. There was that purpose, that calling. And no. And so I think that just became organically part of how I view things and what I do, and kind of why I do what I do now. I wouldn't have ever thought this path or that I'd be sitting here today, but it's all good. It's been an honor to be on the journey. It's kind of cool.
It's more than kind of cool, dude. It's been inspirational. Is there anything in your life that you felt, I don't even know how to catalog this, but I suppose that drive, that whatever your mom knew, whatever that instinct was, whatever that like internal alignment with some purpose, have you found that in any way? Was it as clear for you, or was it just a desire to serve that was the most resonant piece?
Yeah, so that whole idea of purpose is an interesting one, right? We again, depending upon what your belief system is, I believe we're all created for a purpose. And again, that may be a purpose we discover and go, hey, I want to do this. For some, it's I want to serve. And again, I chose to serve in the military. There's 1,000 ways to serve, right? In medical, police, firefighter, education, schools, lots of different ways to serve. And so I think how we're created and as beings, we need to be part of a purpose. We need to be in the pursuit of a purpose, and we need to be in alignment with a purpose. And I find that just from a harmony standpoint within our lives, I think we find the greatest comfort, the greatest peace when we're in pursuit of that purpose. Again, some people believe we're born with a purpose. Some people, we choose a purpose. Regardless of kind of how you come to that point, I think we are, like I said, most effective, most intentional, most impactful when we're in alignment and find that purpose and then walk with that intentionality.
Yeah, without question.
Yeah,
we have this motto called the mantra of practical mindfulness. Practical mindfulness is the overarching concept, and it sounds like a lot of what you're talking about. We think it's the key to leadership. We also think it's the key to, I don't know, existing, I suppose. But it's in full alignment with all the things that you're talking about. And because it is alignment, practical mindfulness requires asking oneself the question, does my behavior match my goal routinely? And then as often as possible, either course correcting or saying yes and continuing down the path. Yeah. And, the more people I talk to, good people like yourself, the more research I do, the more I look into this and reflect on it, the more it feels like, yeah, that's kind of the whole thing. It's not just, does my behavior match my goal? It's not just an accountability measure. It's not just self-reflection in that way. It's the pursuit of harmony. It's the pursuit of congruence with, alignment in one's life. I heard someone talk about the antidote to cognitive dissonance is integrity, and the integrity comes from this alignment. So it's, no matter what terms we're putting on it, it's really interesting. The cognitive dissonance, by the way, I'll say to the listener, but also to you, I feel like I've been hearing and trying not to use the term because I think I only mostly understood it, but cognitive dissonance, do you know what that means exactly? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but
yeah, I probably can't. I probably couldn't articulate it as well. I studied it when I had to learn it back in the day, but Um,
I'm in the same boat, but yeah, I want to hear what are you thinking?
No, when I think about that, and again, if I'm off base, I apologize to the listeners that way. But when I look at that, I think about a disconnect, right? I
Yep.
think about a difference that's occurring, and inauthenticity, a lack of balance within really what we say, what we do, what we think, what we believe, right? And so, to the degree that we're out of alignment of that,
Mhm.
then I think is where we struggle, where we have stress, where we underperform, where we just have where we're not able to operate at our full potential. Right, I think is where we have those. And again, I may be a little bit off on the formal definition of that, but when I think about dissonance, I think about that difference. I think about that, and it reminds me of, and I like that idea of practical mindfulness, because it reminds me of Hogan and Kaiser wrote an article a while ago, and their whole premise was this idea of who you are is how you lead. And it gets to what you're talking about right there too, in terms of what I think versus what I do. Am I in alignment with who I say I am and how I'm showing up? And if I'm not showing up how I think I want to show up, then I got to do something. There's some dissonance there. There's a problem there. Because if I say I am X and I show up as Y, then what am I really? There's what I want to be, and there's who I'm showing up. So to the degree that we can bring those into alignment, your point about checking yourself every now and then, am I showing up the way I want to show up? Am I who I say I am? And making those course corrections are super important, because to the degree that we are allowed to operate in that difference, or that delta is really big, we're going to have some very predictable consequences, both physically, right? And you're understand the athlete, the performance aspect of it, but with psychologically, mentally, and just holistically as a person. I can't keep that imbalance up forever without wear and tear. Think about a tire on a car. When it's out of alignment, you're going to have wear, and that wear is going to have an impact on the viability of the entire vehicle. Right?
Yeah.
When it's out of there, if that tire goes flat or comes off, you're stuck. You're stopped. You can't be who you want to be, right? And so, I think that idea of practical mindfulness is great, because we need to keep it in our awareness. Because when I think about mindfulness too, think about, it's got to be in my awareness. It's got to be part of my nature to check back and be accountable and go, I say I'm this, but am I really? Am I getting the feedback to know? Do I have people like yourself that are going to hold me accountable and say, hey, Doug, you said you were this, but I'm seeing something a little bit different. What does that mean? Right? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I love that term, the wear and tear of misalignment. So good. So good. And you see people get beat up and worn down and burnt out and all that stuff from that exact idea. Have you ever heard the name Gabor Mate?
That does sound familiar.
He's a researcher. He just came out with a book. His new book is called The Myth of Normal. He's brilliant guy, former physician, survivor of the Holocaust, turned to psychology, and really attributes a lot of our societal woes on what you could call these misalignments. And the way he talks about them is usually, or almost always, in the context of trauma. And the way he talks about it is like, I'm pulling all this together because I think an unidentified trauma can create behavioral and existential misalignments that aren't obvious. I think so. And the way he defines trauma, at least as far as I've come to understand, or this is sort of the working definition that I've pulled from the influence of his work, is it's essentially an injury that's just beyond anything that's just beyond your ability to naturally heal is a trauma. And it's interesting because I would have been hesitant. And sometimes I'll be totally frank. Sometimes I think the word trauma, we can overindulge and overuse these terms. Like
Sure.
if not everything is a traumatic experience. And if the fact that you were late for work was a traumatic experience, I would ask that you maybe reimagine your relationship to that. And I don't mean to call people out, because I'm very much in the side of and leaning heavily into the world of therapy and psychology and things like this. But,
Yeah, yeah.
but the way that you name the world matters. And if every injury is a trauma, then that's going to be a long road for the person. Anyway, now that said, that's for one version, and to acknowledge that to a component of the audience that I'm not trying to indulge the word. I'd say to that same component of our audience that it's okay to say it and mean it, because here's what it means. If you fall on the sidewalk and you scrape your wrist or you scrape your arm, you're going to heal naturally, likely without any additional support, and you're going to be fine. It's okay, you got hurt, but it's not traumatic. Now, if you fall and you break your arm, that is a physical trauma. Maybe the bone has to be set. Maybe a cast has to be put on. Like you do need some outside support. You're not just going to heal naturally well. So to think about it from the physical elements has actually been a very helpful way for me to understand it, because it's like, okay, now I kind of get it. Something could happen environmentally or to our psyche, to our psychological experience that is just beyond whatever we have the capacity to naturally heal from. And that's a really interesting idea to me. Now I'll pull it back. Now I will align it with what we were just talking about. What I've seen a lot of is people who are unaware of, they differentiate between lowercase t and capital T traumas. Right. So maybe unaware of some of their smaller traumatic experiences, things like childhood emotional neglect and things of that nature. The misalignments might be appearing in people's lives because of a lack of awareness. So you feel this sort of misalignment, this wear and tear, this existential wear and tear. And step one for a lot of folks is pulling back, slowing down, taking a 3-mile view of the arc of your life to this point, and identifying where you might need to dig in and do a little healing before you progress. Otherwise, healing is probably the right word, because otherwise people will step on toes. Your environment will step on toes. Your own decisions might step on toes of injuries you didn't even know you had.
Right.
So it's an interesting and complicated process, but all of it gets back to this purpose alignment. I love it. And you did it for 22 years, 7 months, 4 days.
Yeah. No, well, I love that conversation, because it really opens up the aperture. Certainly we have the physical things, right? Sometimes if from a performance standpoint, if we know if physically we're able to kind of do something, if we go to our max, we might push a limit or realize that there's something going on there physically that we have to either becomes a hard stop for us or something we need to adjust. But from a psyche and a psychological standpoint, I think it helps to validate that there are those things that happen that are beyond our own ability to help heal. And that means that sometimes we need to come alongside somebody and say, hey, I need some help. I need some support to get past this piece, right? And because some things, traumatic events, sometimes they happen to us. Sometimes we cause them to ourselves, but sometimes things happen to us. And there's a lot of other secondary things like guilt and other things that come along with that are very hard to manage and to deal with. And so that whole idea about kind of being in alignment, if there's an issue that we're not aware of, but that we become aware of, how are we going to manage that? How are we going to deal with that? Right? Are we going to try and ignore it and get past it and say, okay, let's just bury that down on inside. We're not talking about that. Well, we know predictably that has consequences downstream and can manifest itself in other ways, right? It can show up in our relationships. It can show up in other ways that we don't intend to. So that whole idea of alignment is, kind of that idea of my actions and my purpose, but you also throw in intent and some of those other things to really help give that full picture. Because when we think about it, if we're in alignment, right, you've had many times in your life when you have just been active, busy, emotional, and all that. But man, when stuff is in alignment, we just feel like we're flowing, man. And it doesn't have the consequence, the impact, the drain on us. But other times we're really super busy and it's like, oh, it's exhausting because there are things that we're doing that it's not all kind of in that alignment. And so there's that difference between the impact it can have on us long term.
Yeah, it makes it's a different kind of, it's harder to absorb the punch of the experience. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can grind for days if you're doing something you love.
Easy. Yeah.
Yeah, totally right. That's
so
totally
that idea of alignment and harmony, right, is, we used to talk about things like, oh, is it in balance, right? We talk about like work-life balance. Hey, is everything in balance? And I've learned really, it's not so much about balance, it's about harmony. It's about finding the right thing, because balance is an odd one, right? Balance. Now we start talking about thresholds.
Too black and white. It's too, yeah.
It's about how do I find the harmony in the situation, because I may be working harder than I've ever worked in my life, but man, everything's good because I've got everything kind of in harmony. Is it balanced? No, I may be working way harder than I have. Right. So it's that idea of kind of finding the right thing.
Yeah, balance, exactly right. Or, and I'll get a call from my mom, who I love very much. It sounds like we were both blessed to have wonderful mothers, and she'll call me on the weekend and just say, like, I hope you're not working too hard. And sometimes I'll almost be resentful, and now I feel guilty saying about it, but I'm like, because I'm like, I'll get caught up in a project that I'm thrilled about.
Yeah.
And to someone else, this would be work. Right. But I spent 5 hours on a Sunday, and I couldn't be happier. So there's a harmony. So even the very idea of work is interesting. I love that. Not balance, but harmony. And we may have even discussed this last time we spoke, but I like to think of it as like a soup. And and purpose would be, you're creating something to taste, and there's always multiple components. They're not evenly balanced, and it's up to us. The awareness as like the chef of our own experience is, the awareness is like, well, take a taste every now and then. Like maybe we oversalted it. Okay, so we have to work out the ratios and add something else, or maybe it needs a little more salt or sage or rosemary. I don't know. I don't make a lot of soup, Doug, if I'm being honest, but I should if I'm going to use this metaphor, but
I love that, because here's the thing, right? A chef prepares food. They taste their own food. They have a certain, we all have a certain preference for our taste, but the true measure of a chef is in other people tasting it and saying that, because that, by having that ability to have somebody else try that out, it allows us to get past like things like our bias. Like if I've got a bias for salt, or I've got a bias for certain things, I'm going to taste it and go, this is the best I've ever tasted it. Someone else takes a look at it and goes, maybe, but there's some integrity, there's some honesty, there's some balance. If I think I'm the best chef in the world, but I never cook for anybody else, who knows?
Wow. Yeah, that's good.
Right? So that I love that metaphor of kind of, you do it, there's multiple components. It's how you bring it together. But the true test is in the experience of it, in the actual, now manifesting it to somebody else and saying, hey, what do you think? And sharing that.
That's right. That's exactly right. I love that. Well, so I'm realizing that we're about 45 minutes into a conversation, and we're talking mostly about soup. And I love it. But I'm thinking, I'm wondering, like, I don't know how else to phrase this. I want to hear some cool Air Force stories. Like, leadership is your life. You're so good at this. And what were opportunities? What were some challenges that you came up, against in the Air Force? What were some opportunities that you had to lead and lead well? And how can we learn from those?
Oh, that's
a big question. I know.
Yeah, that's a great, and I come at things from odd perspectives, right? We a lot of times in leadership, we'll look at exemplars and of people who've done things really, really, really well. And I've been blessed to have some good leaders that I've worked for. But I look at it a little bit differently too, in terms of while I feel like we can learn from those good examples and we need those positive examples and exemplars, man, I learned just as much from the leaders that were, I'll just say, less good. The leaders that were there that didn't do it right, because the benefit of a negative example is you really get to feel and learn the impact of that ineffectiveness and
Yeah,
the
totally.
consequences it can have, right? I always, tell people, it's like, hey, have you ever worked for a bad leader? And the ones that have go, oh yeah, I got it. And the
Yeah.
ones that haven't, I'm like, I feel sorry for you in a way,
Mm.
because you don't have that lived experience of doing that. So I've had the opportunity to learn from people who weren't. I used to have a boss who would just yell all the time. Just yell, just because that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that's not okay, right? It's not okay to have that, or to have leaders that would just say things that were hurtful and just bad on, and not know their people well enough. And then on the flip side of that is having people, good leaders who served, right? Who said, hey, what can I do for you? What my job is to enable, empower, and embolden you to do what you need to do to the best of that ability, and let me just get out of your way. So I think there's those, and really understanding what is needed at different times, right? From a coaching standpoint, there are times when you need to be really directive with people and go, really let them know kind of what they need to know, because they don't. But then there's other times when you step back and you let them perform, you let them do that, and you let them kind of do that. So from my experience, it's always been trying to learn and listen so that I can lead better with that. Example, when I was at the academy, I was a junior getting ready. No, I was a sophomore getting ready to be a junior. And I met my wife during that time. We had actually grown up in the same church. She was a little younger than me. Her dad was in the Army. They moved around a lot, in and out. But I had come back one weekend and on visit from the academy, and she was there, and kind of the scales were removed, so to speak. And I'm like, wow, how did I never see you before? Anyway, we started dating over that summer, and then I ended up having to start a leadership program that I did. And I knew that if I started that leadership program, because her family was getting ready to be stationed in Belgium, she was going to move away. And before Skype, before Zoom, before text, cell phones, right? It was like, if I didn't have an opportunity to get to know her better, then I wouldn't. And so I went up to the commander at the day one of the program and said, "Sir, I can't do this. I don't want to do this program." I don't think I told him that there's this girl involved, because I figured that probably wouldn't have resonated well. Trusty old major, and he, and I said, I don't want to do this. I've got something else that I need to do. And I needed to spend time with her. And if I was on this program, I'd have been out. And he looked at me and he goes, "Lindsay, if you quit this program, you're going to be a quitter for the rest of your life." And I get what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
But what resonated with me, I'm like, you don't even know me. Yeah. You don't know who I am. You don't know what my motivation is. You don't know what my purpose is, why I'm here, what drives me, what motivates me. You're just telling me that if I don't do what you want me to do, then I'm going to be a loser for the rest of my life. Well, I opted out of the program, dated my wife, 30 and a half years later, we're still married, and all is good. So that whole idea of what that really taught me was, you got to know your people. If you got a person that comes to you and says something like that, what's really going on? What's really driving that? What's really happening? So you got to know kind of your people. You got to take care of your people. And then you just got to listen, right? Those types of things. So when you talk about leadership examples, leadership experiences, that's what I've tried to do throughout, is just be that person who's willing to listen, willing to learn, to be better about who I am as a leader, and then just, let them grow and empower them to be who they need to be. Not perfect, made mistakes, but that's always been my goal.
I love this. I'm going to ask a couple more things. So I actually just got off a call with a client, and we talked about the difference between being a motivation or an imposition, and how distinct that was in leadership. And it's as simple as people, if you're an imposition, if you impose your values and motives onto other people, but you have great potential as a motivator if first you identify what their motives are, what motivates you, what moves you. And so I love this. So he did this in your words. He didn't know your motives, and your advice first is get to know your people. I want to create something real quick. I want two more. I want the 3 Douglas Lindsay keys to leadership. I got one. It's know your people. What are some other specifics?
Well, and here's one that I've always tried to do, and it kind of in that way is you can only lead from where you are. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier too about if your tank empty, you're going to lead from an empty tank. You're going to have less to give. You're going to have less to serve. So that whole idea of you're going to lead from where you are. So are you where you want to be? So that whole idea of that. So am I allowing my tank to be filled? Am I preparing myself? Am I learning what I need to be effective as a leader? Am I listening and understanding where you're coming from so that I can be the person that's going to enable you to do what you need to do, what your purpose is, and enable that piece. So I think that's the real overarching one. And then another one I think is, we're seeing this in failure in spades in the news, but character matters. What your center is, what your purpose is. And we've talked a little bit about that too, but character matters. You got to understand that you need to have a center. You need to have a compass on which you are going to base your life, because that allows you to know when you're off course. It allows you to know when you're off track, and how you can do that is have people around you that will call you call you on it when you're inconsistent. You're accountable to where you need to be and who you say you are, so that if I get off track, you're going to come to me and go, "Hey, Doug, that what's going on? That didn't seem right. What's happening with that?" So I don't know how many that was. I don't know if that
you're at 3, and that's amazing. So okay. I hear know your people.
Yep.
I hear you can only lead from where you are, and character matters.
Yeah.
Those are huge.
Well, see, and the beauty of all that is you are in complete control of all 3 of those.
Yeah.
If I can only lead from where I'm at, if I'm not where I want to be, then I do that. My dad always had a saying. So my dad played professional baseball for a little while with the St. Louis Cardinals. He was a pitcher. And so that was really cool. He blew his knee out in spring training. And so that kind of cut his career short. But he would always coach us in baseball. And when we're like, 8 years old, and got this guy coaching us, he was intense, but it was good. But he would sit there and go, a saying that he would always tell us was, he goes, if your best isn't good enough, you need to better your best. And what he was, at first when I heard that, I'm like, well, I don't even know what that means. But the beauty in that, it's true. It's like, if I'm not where I want to be, then let me figure out how I can get better at that. And there's the process of discovery. What do I need to do to get better? Now, when we're talking about elite athletes, there are certainly, perhaps caps on performance. But you work with athletes every day. There are ways to maximize that performance and get a little bit better. But that kind of always stuck with me, that whole idea of, if your best isn't good enough, then you need to better your best. I need to figure out, am I living what I say I am or where I want to be? And if I'm here as a leader, and I want to be here, I'm in control of that. That's on me. The heavy lifting is on me, not my people. I don't need my people to work harder. I need to be better as a leader so that I can encourage, motivate, inspire them to be at their full capacity. So I love that onus is back on me, not on someone else.
It's incredible. And it's also sort of subliminally in there. If your best isn't good enough, you need to better your best. Well, the question that occurs to me is, good enough for what? There too, you get to decide. Like if I'm not throwing fast enough to make the St. Louis Cardinals, that's my vision of good enough. But it starts with a degree of intentionality too. So there's the ownership, there's the agency that you talk about, but there's also good enough for what? The best in one place might be good enough for something else, but it requires intentionality. And actually, I keep coming back to this. It's probably I'm sure the people who listen to all our stuff get bored of hearing it, but I never get bored of saying it. Does your behavior match your goal piece? Because the first time the time I remember it resonating most, I was down. I'm not going to name where it was. It'll give too much away, but I was down south talking to a team of leaders in an organization. And we had been talking for probably 3-4 hours. And we were on the whiteboard. I love a good whiteboard. And, we finally got to this question. I introduced the concept of, we had done a lot of sort of stage setting. What do we want? All this kind of, we got to the question, does your behavior match your goal? What's our organizational approach to practical mindfulness?
Right.
And the discomfort in the room was palpable. Yep. And you know what it was? Mostly, honestly, it was like, what became very clear very quickly was the goal wasn't obvious.
Okay.
People weren't aligned around it. Were there KPIs? Were there objectives? Were there financial were there numbers that people had to hit? Yeah. But organizationally, like, what's our mission? It's like everyone had a sort of vague sense of what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
But that clearly wasn't good enough, because how possibly then could you ever evaluate on a personal organizational level whether or not your behavior mapped onto a goal that wasn't clear? And I say that, but it's like, you talk about a compass. It doesn't have to be, and people, I've worked with people, coached people through this too. It doesn't have to be fully articulated. This is exactly what I want and what I want it to look like. But to have a sort of compass pointing you in true north without getting some kind of direction, and at least on that level, I want to run an organization that makes purely ethical decisions, or an organization that will value the human over the product. And sometimes we'll have to take a lump financially, just conversation around where you're heading together.
Yeah.
To exist in the absence of that is like, there's no way. And what do you find? Like, I wonder if this is reflective of your experience. You mentioned those angry people who kind of maybe talk down to people and call people out in a negative way. I think you find that stuff more when the vision isn't clear, because it's just sort of this abstract sense of, I don't like what I'm seeing and I'm mad about it. I'm frustrated about it, but you can't identify the gap between the behavior and the goal because the goal hasn't been clearly shared.
Well, I agree, because if the goal has been clearly shared and you have a purpose or an intent that you're all working toward, if someone starts being a little askew, you've got everybody come around going, that's not the way we do things around here. That's not okay, right? There's a norming piece to that as well, too, because that's not who we're about, right? That's not what we stand for. That's not who we say we are. Right?
We call it's an organizational homeostasis. And I don't want to use too big a word, but it's like, this is our level. And it becomes obvious when someone's moving significantly from it. Yeah,
well, and you've seen it as well, too. If the organization, and this is where I think sometimes organizations get adrift a little bit, someone starts working at cross purposes to the intent of the organization and they're allowed to persist, then that can cause a lot of churn in the organization about what's important, what's not important. Is this really what we're all about? So it doesn't always have to be clearly articulated in this nice, brilliant, eloquent vision statement.
Right.
But everybody needs to be walking in the same direction, because then we can sit there and go, I know what I'm doing. A KPI is not a vision, right? It's not. A goal is not a vision. It is, those are waypoints, right? Those are predictive indices of whether or not you're going to hit a goal. But the purpose, right? Like, it's one of the things I like about working with the Air Force Academy. Their purpose is to develop leaders of character. That is the purpose statement. Everything goes under that umbrella. Are we perfect? No, as an institution, but we are always trying to do that. So if we start a program, is it going to feed developing leaders of character? If we're going to have sports, how does sports help us develop leaders of character? And what is our purpose? So no matter where I'm at in the organization, I'm a faculty member in the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership, like I was for 10 years, I knew how I fit into that. Yeah. Because I knew what I was trying to do in that purpose. Or if I'm a military instructor or something, we're at least walking. How I do that's a little different than the athletics do it, or maybe a little bit different than anybody else. But we're all still pointing that same way, going, that's what we're about. That's who we say we are.
Develop leaders of character.
Yeah.
That's an incredible purpose.
Right. And again, we fall short. We're not perfect. We have issues that happen at the academy that
Sure.
aren't that way. But we're not creating military officers. We're not creating warriors, pilots. That's not what we do. We're creating leaders of character, because if we have leaders of character, guess what takes care of itself? All that other stuff.
All that other stuff.
I can train you to be a pilot. I can train you to be a security forces. We can talk about, launching missiles and doing all that kind of stuff. If I know you're grounded and I know who you are and what you stand for, the rest is training, right? Yeah. I can train that other stuff in there.
Right.
So,
that's more almost like compliance in certain areas. Yeah. But totally agree with this. Have you've heard the story of JFK at NASA when they were at the moon launch? You've heard this?
Yeah.
For the readers, just in case, or for the listeners, just in case. So John F. Kennedy on the NASA, push me if I get the details wrong. He's on the NASA HQ during, when we're trying to get to the moon, and he's walking around and glad handing and taking a look at stuff and being briefed and all these things. And eventually he comes across a janitor, and the janitor's mopping the floors, and he introduces himself to the janitor, friendly, charismatic guy. Says, "Hi, what's your name?" The janitor tells him, and JFK Kennedy goes, "And what do you do here?" And the janitor goes, "Mr. President, I'm working to put a man on the moon." And and it's like one of those things where it's like the mission is, it's like, well, some from the outside, well, he's mopping the floors, and later he's gonna dust or something. I don't know, but no, it's so aligned. Every little bit of it becomes important. And that around a unifying principle. And then, does your behavior match your goal? Yeah, but you have to identify what it is, and then create the connective tissue. And the KPIs, to your point earlier, you were talking about KPIs. All this stuff has its place, of course, but KPIs is like, we think of those level of goals as signposts along the way. Like, are we moving in the right direction? Are we hitting our objectives? But that in and of itself that's not the end game.
No,
that's not exciting to people.
No, and we see that sometimes where people in organizations will get sideways on metrics, and it'll all be about the metrics and what are the metrics telling us? And it's like, metrics are they're there to serve a purpose. Are we heading the direction? They're not the end state, right? It's not about that. It's about, what are we trying to enable? What type of capability are we trying to do, right? Metrics in sports, win losses are one indicator, and it's how we like to do that. But as a coach, growth, you see individual growth, and it may not always reflect on wins and losses, right? We see Arizona lose as a 2 seed yesterday, and we sit there and go, oh man, but we don't see the growth and what's there and what the 15 seed got and how they did. And so there's so much more than that, but it's really easy to focus on, did you win a championship? Did you win here?
Right.
But there's a lot of things going on there. What are we trying to do? We trying to develop young leaders and athletes to be good citizens? Yeah. Win losses are great, and I know that makes the news, and that's all important. But man, that's only for a purpose, right? It's for that larger meaning.
Well, and that sports metaphor is a good one, even as it aligns with people in the service, in the Air Force and other service academies, because it's like, you can have multiple goals at once too, and probably there should be some kind of hierarchy. Like I'll go to Arizona again. Did they want to win a Pac-12 championship or a national championship or make the Final Four? They probably did, but hopefully, like you just said, hopefully they were also in the business of developing high character young people and setting them up for better lives and using basketball and educational platforms. So, like, can you have all those out there at the same time? Yes, of course you can. But I think having these true north, this compass that you talk about, it reminds you that, like, if you don't get that one outcome, the championship, that, like, if the season's a wash, if the experience is a wash, if your time at the academy is a wash because you don't have this one objectified thing, this one quantifiable thing, man, what a missed opportunity that would be.
Well, so it's a missed opportunity, but I think it also misaligns our identity and what's going on, right? You'll see, because if you have an athlete whose sole identity is about that kind of winning and that ultimate goal, and you've seen it as well as I have, someone gets hurt, they can't do that anymore. They just struggle for time, sometimes years, going, who am I? Because they've never been able to understand themselves as a person outside of their identity as myself as as an athlete, as a business person, as something like that. But it's got to be more than that, right? Because otherwise, that something happens that we can't control. I blow out my ankle, and it's like, what do I do? Who do I say I am now? Because I don't have that other piece. And it's real comforting that if we have that larger purpose, we know what it is. We know what it is. Okay, not going to happen that way. Going to do that. My mom knew she wanted to be a mom. She couldn't have children naturally. So that did not dissuade her. She knew her purpose. She knew, I wanted to be a mom. And that may not be a popular thing to say, but that was who she wanted to be, was a mom. So she was not dissuaded, right? She figured it out. That. Yeah. So that whole idea of, we got to understand that purpose gives us an identity beyond just what we do, so that we can be part of that larger meaning that we have.
That was so artfully pulled into a full circle moment. That was really well done. That was really well done. Because that's so right. And I'm so glad that you're giving her all the credit that she's obviously due. That's an inspirational story. Well, we have to call time on this, but I know that you and I are going to continue to do work together in this realm, and that excites me very much. And I want to say that I'm really grateful for all that you do for people. It's really important work. I would even suggest that if you ever have anything else you want to talk about, I can't speak for Coach Lim, our podcast producer, but I'm sure he'd be on board with inviting you back to the podcast. So let's keep this conversation going.
Yeah, it'd be an honor. No, I appreciate that, and appreciate the kind words, and appreciate what you all are doing as well too, because this is a multi-front battle here that we're doing, and an endeavor, and we all are able to, give our input from a little bit different way, and to impact that change of really trying to make a difference in leadership and character and development and performance and all of that. It takes all of us to do that. And so I appreciate the work that you all are doing as well.